On today's show, it's part one of our season preview for the Florida Panthers 2023-24 season. We're going to discuss the latest roster moves, goaltending, biggest X factor, and the biggest offseason move that Bill Zito made.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to this Florida Panthers season preview special here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News, and you can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_F. LA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, by the time this recording comes out, we will already be one day through the NHL season and already one game through. We are recording this in the middle of the Blackhawks Penguins game where Sidney Crosby just scored to make it 2-0 Penguins, to give you guys an idea of when we are recording this show. But with this season preview show, it is Wednesday, which means it is a Winans Wednesday edition of Winans Wednesday. It might not. It's actually not a Winans Wednesday, even though it is Wednesday, but it is also including a Fairbanks here, where we also have Nick Fairbanks on the show here. So Nick Fairbanks is on double duty along with Jacob Winans. So guys, very glad to have both of you guys here for this season preview edition of the show. And Nick, you're on double duty this week, it looks like, my friend. So thank you for coming back here a second time this week, even though the other show has not happened yet. Thank you, my friend.
Not a problem. I'll pass it off to Jacob because it is Winans Wednesday in my head.
You're taking my spotlight, but no, it's awesome. We're under 24 hours away from Panthers hockey now. I mean, it's really exciting. So we've got a lot to talk about for sure.
No doubt, and let's discuss more about the latest on the roster. And like I spoke about in my show with David Rodriguez of the FLA Cats Hockey Podcast, when we discussed that show, just like the title, it said the unofficial 23-man roster, because I'm so glad I labeled it as unofficial, because boy, would it have been hard to get that wrong and to actually come back here. Which is why we put unofficial. But at 10:01 a.m., and just giving you guys the order of operations and the timeline of when the Panthers announced it, rosters were due at 5 p.m., officially released at 10:01 the very next day. So originally they had the Panthers as a 22-man roster, and Brett Ritchie not being a part of it. And we spoke about Justin Sordoff being sent down to AHL Charlotte. But around 5:30 today, Justin Sordoff has been recalled to the Florida Panthers. So via a technicality, he is part of the opening night roster for the Florida Panthers. But there also had to be a roster move made in order to fit Justin Sordoff into the mix, because they only had less than $500K in cap space. But the only person to be placed on LTIR, we were expecting Brandon Montour and Aaron Ekblad to be part of both on LTIR to start the season, but only Aaron Ekblad is part of it, which 7.5 of relief, but you want to keep that space for when he is ready to return. Once again, the December 15th range. And of course, that's what we see on Cap Friendly and Puckpedia. Double checked on both of them. I'm throwing a lot at you guys at the moment as far as the roster, but what are your original thoughts on now what we know is going to be the opening night roster? And we'll actually go do this in a snake order, which we will start with the guy who this day is about him, Jacob Winans, because it's Winans Wednesday. So we will start with you, Jacob, my friend.
Yeah, so a couple key things with the roster that jump out at me. One, the fact that Aaron Ekblad is the only one on LTIR. There was some concern that Sam Bennett might find himself there with an injury that we don't really know many of the details. We know he was in a walking boot and that he may miss a couple of weeks, according to head coach Paul Maurice. But we've seen day-to-day injuries turned into weeks at a time, especially with Sam Bennett. So you're never really too sure on the injury front. But the fact that he's not on long-term IR is really, really good sign. So with him and Montour not being on LTIR, I feel more comfortable about both of those guys and their impending returns. I personally feel like Montour is tracking to return early, which would be huge for the defense. So my initial thought on that roster is we got really, really lucky injury wise as far as the length of time we're going to be without guys. Beyond that, Mackie Samoskevich making the team, that's huge. We talked about it over the summer a bunch, wondering if he was going to crack the lineup from opening night. In my opinion, and the majority opinion really was that he wasn't going to start the season on the opening night roster, that he was going to have some AHL time, but he really kind of burst onto the scene in preseason. I think he had a really strong preseason. It was impossible to keep him off the roster. Then Justin sort of really impressed. So now that he's back in the mix, I think we've got a little bit of a youth injection. I think it's a really exciting time for those guys. Sort of probably a year or so ahead of schedule, making the team. I didn't think he'd make it this year. Thought he'd make it next year. Mackie definitely a year ahead of schedule in my opinion. So I'm excited with the youth, and I think our injury situation may be a little better than we thought.
I agree with you 100%. I believe that the injuries were kept, how should I say, undercover by Bill Zito and the organization with really how bad they were, what the timetable was going to be. I mean, Aaron Ekblad played like a warrior during the playoffs, so I'm not surprised that he's the only one on LTIR. But the fact is that his money does free up, some roster moves that they can make. Very happy that Samoskevich is going to make it. He basically came into the camp and took the job. That's why we don't have Denisenko on the roster anymore. That's why he's in Vegas. Just unfortunately, given too many chances, just couldn't put it together, and they tried to put him through waivers, and there you go. As far as Montour goes, I've been a firm believer that he was coming back early since I saw probably one of his first workouts earlier in the summer. It just looked like he was recovering a lot quicker, and he was getting back into shape a lot quicker as well. So, hopefully by the end of this month he'll be there, which will be a huge relief to the defense, because I know the bottom six, I would probably say probably the D-men 5, 6, and 7 are going to be a little unnerving to watch probably for the first couple of weeks. But I think as soon as Montour comes in, you'll see a little bit more fluid on the back end, and I think you'll see Florida kind of settled in. Remember, we were predicting December as a timeline for how long the team had to be afloat, just to hopefully make the playoffs. Now that window's closed substantially, and now we're looking at maybe November, early November. So that's what I have to say about the roster.
Yeah, and you also got to consider the fact that these two young guys, don't know if they're gonna have their rookie lap together on Thursday, because I know Sam Bennett is not gonna play on Thursday. Paul Maurice said that he doesn't even know if he's going to be traveling with the team yet because of the situations of, even with the second game of the season being a 4 p.m. game against the Winnipeg Jets, the fact that they won't have a morning skate in between even though it's a short travel from Minnesota to Winnipeg, chances are we won't see him in the first 2 games. I'm very sure that Bennett won't even play against the Winnipeg Jets. So I believe the earliest for him will be against the New Jersey Devils on the Monday, October 16th. But also I want to point out about the whole family impact of it. Mackie Samoskevich said that his family is going to be traveling to the game as well, and that it's going to be just it's been a long time coming. And even Paul Maurice spoke about when you make the decisions on when a guy makes a team, about how the hard work of family when it comes to traveling, paying for all these camps as well, expensive equipment, which hockey equipment is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination and all. and just the hard work, and credit to Mackey, credit to his family and all that stuff, and credit to Justin Sordiff as well. If they do end up being in the lineup, both in the same game, we could see Mackey Samoskevich definitely playing on the second line with Matthew Tkachuk, and Etulis Sterainen, and maybe Justin Sordiff playing on that third line with Anton Lindell, and then shift Nick Cousins down to the fourth line because of what Nick Cousins' flexibility it is as far as that. But that also leaves the whole question about Brett Ritchie and his status as far as PTO there. And Paul Maurice also said that there could be a future with him with the organization. We don't know if it's going to be something with Charlotte. We don't know if it's going to be something with the organization as far as injury, like I said. But I don't think that we are going to see the last of Brett Ritchie in relation to the Florida Panthers. The Florida Panthers did, of course, deal with this with Eric Stahl last year and all that. So just something to keep an eye out for. We're going to pause this conversation between me and my fellow guest host, Jacob Winans, and Nick Fairbanks for this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast to tell you guys all about Sleeper. And the NHL season is finally here. Will the Florida Panthers have the season we've been yearning for? I absolutely love the NHL. I know you do too, and that's why I want to tell you all about the Sleeper app. The Sleeper app is the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network, and it's my go-to for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey. With Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash on daily fantasy. The NHL has never been more exciting than it is now, with studs like Connor McDavid, Alexander Ovechkin, Sidney Crosby, Cale Makar, and even Florida Panthers like Matthew Tkachuk and Alexander Barkov. Just pick more or less on stats for these stars on stats like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, and more. You heard me, Panther fans. 100 times a payout on Sleeper. So start paying attention and get your picks right, and you could win big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL, and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for detail. This episode is also brought to you by BetterHelp. And do you ever feel like your brain is getting in your way? Sometimes balancing a job, a side hustle, being out with friends, and having a social life, sometimes it can get in your own way, and then sometimes it can be overstimulating. Like, you know what you should do, what's good for you, but you just can't do it. Therapy helps you figure out what's holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of against yourself. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNHL today to get 10% off your first month. Once again, visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNHL. Let's go right into some of the preparations for the season as far as that. And let's start with a couple of questions as far as moves this offseason, what we're expecting for come opening night on Thursday, October 12th. And lots of roster turnover. There's a big belief within the fan base that the team got better on paper, and something I've said that this team got a lot beefier, especially on the fourth line. But I want to ask you guys, and I'll start with Nick on this one. Who do you think is the better or more or most impactful move that Bill Zito has made this offseason? Is it Ulrich Ekman-Larsson, Evan Rodriguez, or other?
I'm going to have to go with Evan Rodriguez just because I honestly didn't even have him on the board as somebody who would be considering coming to Florida, basically where he's played and his type of game. But I think what he brings to the forward lines is not only being able to play every single position, but to be able to play them well, and that he can slide up anywhere up and down the lineup. So I think him allowing himself to, be able to be put in any situation to help the team is amazing. I would have said Oliver Ekman-Larsson, but I think that his time will probably be cut short for probably about a month or two of his, his importance of what he's been brought in to do as far as power play quarterback. But, not to say that he's not going to do his best and not going to help out the Panthers, but I just think Evan Rodriguez just gives the Panthers a different dynamic going forward, and that they could sustain themselves longer with him in the lineup.
So for me, I'm going to agree with that, but I'm actually going to go with other. So I'll say a couple things on Rodriguez and Ekman-Larsson here first. Rodriguez, for me, when I think about Evan Rodriguez, it's not so much just Evan Rodriguez. I look at that whole deal as a package almost, flipping Duclair for Lorenz, the fifth, and Rodriguez. And I think that's good value. Rodriguez is a little bit more well-rounded than Duclair, not strictly offense. Might not have as much offensive production as the Duke had, being a 30-goal scorer. I don't necessarily think Rodriguez will score 30 goals this year. I think I put him somewhere comfortably around 25 and 25, especially if he gets top-line time, which is great value at $3 million per year. And he can play defense. He can play that defensive forward style. He can play penalty kill. He can play power play. So he's really well-rounded. And Ekman-Larsson, like Nick said, he's going to be the power play quarterback for a short time, but that's not really what he's going to do his entire season here, because Ekblad and Montour will take those roles back. I think at that time, Ekman-Larsson becomes a really, really just really positive complementary defenseman. I think he becomes a better complementary defenseman than most teams have, because he's a guy who at one point in time was a true elite number one defenseman. So putting him in a complementary role, you can get that kind of production, but in shorter minutes. And when you have shorter minutes, that impact can sometimes be bigger in those limited minutes. So those two guys are hugely important. But my biggest offseason addition, I think, that really stabilizes that defense is Niko Mikkola. I think I'm really excited about what he brings. Defensively sound, physical. He makes a good first pass. When you lose Radko Gudas, you really lost a lot of the physicality on the back end, and that's really hard to replace. But I think Mikkola is going to do a good job of being physical. He's not going to have as many of the giant highlight reel hits that Radko Gudas had, but he's also not the type of guy who's completely free roaming in his zone looking for a big hit. He plays his position. He plays it well. He's a great stay-at-home defenseman. He blocks shots. It's really, to me, when everyone is back healthy on that blue line, he's a young Mark Stahl. He's Mark Stahl, but before he got old and kind of worn down. He's New York Mark Stahl. He's the guy who's going to play that shutdown role. He's going to make a good first pass, and he's not flashy, but he gets the job done. And I think when we get to playoff time, that kind of defense is going to be massive. So he's actually my biggest offseason addition. I think he's going to really stabilize that back end.
Yeah, and you think about the guy who got term as well at $2.5 million, definitely a great value. And you talk about the first pass, about especially when you're catching the other team on a shift change. I think that's definitely going to be real important for Niko Mikkola. But I'm gonna go with Nick's answer here, and I'm gonna say Evan Rodriguez is probably the most impactful move, because if you don't, I'm not saying that if you don't sign Evan Rodriguez, like, what are you going to do about the power play? Because you could also give an opportunity for Carter Verhaeghe to be on power play one as well, and all. But I think it gives you an option of someone who's been there before. And I think that I think that what he has done in the last few years, I think that it's really definitely gonna be an impact on the roster and all. So I think I'm gonna go with Evan Rodriguez there and all. And we've talked about the whole Barkov needing a friend on that right wing consistently, and not an interchanging piece constantly. We've seen Verhaeghe be that constant piece on his left hand, on his left side. Now we need to see that consistently on the right side as well. And now there's that chance, especially with Evan Rodriguez having some term on the team as well, that he definitely can have that, and that could be possibly one of the best lines in the entire National Hockey League as well. So I'm going to go with Evan Rodriguez as far as that. We're going to take a pause of this conversation between myself and my guest host, Jacob Winans, and Nick Fairbanks, to tell you all about Jase Medical And the Jase case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. All it takes to get a Jase case is to fill out a simple online form, and in some cases, jump on a quick call with one of our board-certified physicians. Get ongoing care from our physicians on any treatment-related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Don't be caught unprepared. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. Jase handles everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy, medication, delivery, and ongoing consultation and care. Get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics from Jase Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout at jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com. Once again, get $20 off these life-saving antibiotics from Jase Medical by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout. Biggest X factor on the team. Let's go with Jacob first on this one. Who do you think is the biggest X factor for the Florida Panthers this season?
This is the obvious answer would be Matthew Tkachuk. I think that'd be the easy answer. That's the low hanging fruit. But for me, I'm going to say Sasha Barkov. I think he's the biggest X factor. I think Tkachuk, you know what you're going to get from him. I think he takes a lot of the attention off of Barkov. But I think my biggest X factor this season is Sasha Barkov, because last season the numbers were fine, but regular season wasn't necessarily as dominant, and also dealt with some injury issues. He had pneumonia and missed a lot of time. There was some inconsistency in that top line's production. Not entirely his fault. There's a lot of guys in and out. He's missing Duclair for the majority of the year. But I'm looking for a more assertive Barkov. I'm looking for a more trigger happy Barkov, a guy who's going to shoot more. And I know. Looking at our topic list pre-recording, I know we're going to get into some predictions for Barkov for this season. But for me, he's the biggest X factor. His health is a big thing. I want to see him have a healthy season. I want to see him have a season where he shoots more. I want to see a career high in shots on goal. And I want to see him elevate Evan Rodriguez, because Verhaeghe had a career year last season. A lot of that came on the line with Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett. I want to see that that production from Verhaeghe on the line with Barkov again, and I want to see a career year out of Evan Rodriguez with Barkov really carrying that group. So he's my biggest X factor. If we can get the assertive, the aggressive, the shoot first, the confident version of Barkov that we saw in the playoffs, especially in that Carolina series over the course of the season, I think the sky's the limit for this team. So it's going to be the captain Barkov for me.
So I have a kind of a tie between the two, because one, I'm the fan club president of the one guy, and then the other one, he played insane out of his mind during the playoffs. So I will say I think one of the X factors is going to be Anton Lundell, because it's going to be the season for him to either break out, or he's going to show that, hey, listen, I still have a little bit more development to go in my game, which, players are going to do that. They're always going to find different ways to change their game up or be relevant and everything. But I think this is the season right now, after his playoff showing, that he needs to make a statement that, hey, I can challenge for the second center spot, and this is what I can provide. I like the line with him and Luosterainen and hopefully Samoskevich later in the season. I really think that's going to be a solid line. And then I'm going to have to go I'll probably go with Bobrovsky now, because as up and down as he's been since being a Florida Panther, it's been very, very troubling and very frustrating to watch him play. And then to get to see him play what he did in the playoffs last season, we have to wonder what kind of Bob we're going to get. And I can only hope that we'll get the Bob in between those two. And maybe he can actually probably put on 40 wins this year if he's on top of his game. Because right now it's him, Stolarz, and then we have Knight. I don't know how confident I'll feel if it's Stolarz and Knight if Bob is not doing well or if he gets injured. So I think you always have to build from the net out. You have to protect your goalie, and then on top of that, I think your goalie's got to be your best player on the ice.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Bobrovsky as well. Well, as far as biggest X factor,
We didn't
because
talk pre-game, pre-show. I
nope,
promise.
nope, we did not. And I just think about what he's built from, what he is trying to build from the Stanley Cup run to now. And I think of the year. I think of an okay regular season last season, a pretty troubling 2020 to start. So those are the odd years where his production hasn't been as good. But you think about the President's Trophy winning season, his best season with the Panthers. It's a sometimes it's every other year with goalies when it comes to how well they play, depending on the goalie. And I think that it's definitely gonna possibly be possibly a chance for him to build off what he did in the postseason. And I think that there's a lot of confidence there. He still prepares like no other as far as his focus, as far as what he brings to the table as well. And all. And yeah, I think that it's definitely has to go to the $10 million man in Sergei Bobrovsky, which goes to our next question. Which Bobrovsky will we see this regular season, and how many wins will he get? And I will go first on this one. I think so. The 2022 season when they won the President's Trophy, 39 wins, a single season franchise record for the club. He's only been past 25 once in a Florida Panthers sweater. So I think he's going to pass 25, something that I discussed in an article with the Hockey News with David Dwork, that I think he's going to get higher than that. I think he's going to get somewhere between 30 to 33 wins on the season for Sergei Bobrovsky, because I also, when it comes to goalie wins, we also have to factor in how well the team can score. So that's another big factor on what produces a win in the National Hockey League. So I'm going to say somewhere between 30 and 33 wins for Sergei Bobrovsky. And we will turn to Nick on this one.
I think if the team plays to their ability and they don't take nights off, which unfortunately, I think every team does, and he doesn't allow himself to get into his head, I think he could put up between 35 and 40 wins. And I think he could keep the crease this year. Now, he's going to need breaks because he is getting older. I just worry about his health right now as he's getting older. I mean, the way that he prepares and he stretches and he just gets in that mode, I just wonder at what point is his body going to be like,
Fair.
Okay, we need to start, taking it a little back and start redoing, his workouts a little bit differently. So that's one of my concerns. But I still think that if the team does play up to their potential, it's going to be 35 to 40 wins. And I will say he'll probably have over a 9-10 save percentage.
Whoa, that's bold. Jacob?
So I'll agree with a part of that. I also think he will top 9-10. I think his save percentage will top 9-10. 35 to 40 wins seems ambitious. I'll put him at 33 to 35. I think the main reason for that is not necessarily his performance. It's the fact that the Panthers are in a position with their goaltending where they can afford to give him some nights off, some breaks. I think this is the deepest the Panthers crease has been since Bob Knight and Chris Drieger were alternating the net. I think the Panthers haven't had this kind of depth in a while. We're in a position where you've got Bob, you've got Stolarz who can start games. His numbers don't look great from last year, but he was on an Anaheim team that is absolutely awful defensively last season. So he's good. He's huge, covers a lot of the net. So I think he will win some games this year. I think Spencer Knight, when he gets back into a consistent schedule and playing games consistently, I think he's going to have a good season. I think he's definitely going to win some games this year. Eventually, I think he will. I think he's got a future as the starter here. I think he will end up taking the backup role. later on this season once he's back comfortable. He looked great in preseason, so I think the Panthers are in a position where they can afford to give those two guys some games. And even if something goes catastrophically wrong, knock on wood, Matt Guzda's a guy who I'd be comfortable playing games with too. He's another great goalie, very young, but he was even called up to be the backup on a couple of occasions last year. So this is the best depth the Panthers have had in the crease in a few years. So Bob, I think he's the leader of the group. He's going to be the starter the whole way through. It's his crease. It's his job. He is the guy. And I think building off of that playoff performance, I think you definitely have to be mindful of his fatigue level. You don't want to burn him out because he had just a generational playoff run right up until the Stanley Cup when he just kind of ran out of gas. But I think you have to manage his games. But it's his job. It's his crease. I think he could win 33 to 35, and the guys behind him, they can pick up the slack and win about 20 more. I think they're in a really good position between the pipes.
Yeah, and definitely one of the best situations that the Florida Panthers goaltending has had. And it's crazy to think that when Drieger, Knight, and Bob were in part of the mix, it wasn't even for a full season. It was only for like a couple of months. So right before Chris Drieger signed the deal with the Seattle Kraken, which I believe he was put on waivers and sent down
He
to
was
Coachella Valley.
waived.
Yeah,
so. He's in Coachella Valley now.
Yeah, so crazy to think that how what a difference a few years makes. But so next one we will ask, speaking of goaltending, when do you think we will see Spencer Knight again? And yes, there's different factors to when we could see Spencer Knight, as far as injuries, as far as performance as well. Even and you just never know what's going to happen. So we'll start with Jacob since we're doing snake order. When do you think we will see Spencer Knight again?
Personally, I think it is all dependent on his performance in Charlotte. And in the past, Charlotte has not been a great defensive team. And they also just didn't really score a lot to provide any kind of run support for the goalies there. So I think now Charlotte's in a really good position. We've got a lot of guys who were fringe NHLers or guys who were on the NHL roster last year or guys who played on NHL rosters in other places last season that are now all in Charlotte. The only two guys that really got sniped off of waivers were Ludwig, which I'm really disappointed about, and Grigory Denisenko. So Charlotte's in a much better position. They've got a good team in front of him now. I think if he gets off to a hot start in Charlotte, I see no reason why you can't give him a game, because right now with Aaron Ekblad on LTIR, you have the cap space. There's no reason why he can't be called up and given a game. Honestly, that for a while there, I wasn't too sure the Panthers wouldn't carry three goalies. I think they're in a position where getting him games is a priority. His development is a priority. So depending on how well he starts in Charlotte, I anticipate he will start well. It may get to a point relatively early in the year where you just can't afford to not play him. If he's tearing it up at the AHL level, he proves that he's better than that level, which I think he will. It's going to be a situation where you might not be able to keep him there. He might just simply earn his way back to NHL time, which that brings up that'll be a tough situation to figure out, trying to squeeze Stolars through waivers or carry three goalies, or if there's an injury, hopefully not, but we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. But I think talent wise, Spencer Knight is the clear number two when it comes to talent, and eventually talent does shine through. So we'll see how long he stays there, but it's dependent for me on how he starts with Charlotte.
I will say probably after the first of the year, I think what it's going to come down to is either Bob or Solars is going to either, have a time where, hey, they're just not playing well, or they need a break, and they'll bring Knight up. And hopefully at that time, he's kind of figured some things out. He's gotten back into a groove, and he's proven himself to come back and be able to play at the NHL level. I could see it being probably in the second week of January, and then probably either just before the All-Star game or just after, just so that, the guys have a break. And it also gives Spencer some time at the NHL level to kind of get back, his reads and how he's going to, change his level from the AHL to the NHL. So There's no pressure on him right now. Literally, the only pressure that he has is what's putting on himself. And he just needs to clear his mind, understand that, he's still in a really great position. Adversity is sometimes the best teacher. And hopefully, going forward, he'll be able to learn from this and he'll come out a much better goaltender than what we even seen and what we expect.
Yeah, and Spencer Knight being 21 games short of being no longer being waivers exempt, a great situation for the Panthers as a team to still give him the starts that he needs. And we've seen him get quite a bit of shutouts at the AHL level in the last few years as well. So definitely we know that he can do this at the AHL level as well. And the fact that, go ahead.
Armando, sorry to cut you off. I want to ask you a question actually while we're on this topic. I want to get your opinion on it. Do you think any part of him starting in Charlotte, do you think it benefits him to let the Panthers figure out how well they come together defensively without Ekblad and Montour? Maybe not throwing Spencer Knight in front of a defense at the NHL level that's not whole right now. Do you think there's some consideration to not bringing him up until the Panthers are back in one piece on the blue line?
I think that could be, because you don't want to ruin a confidence for a young goaltender if the defense is not great around him. So I think if it's you know that the talent difference between the two leagues are just at different levels. So you also got to figure out what you have on your bottom pair as well, with an older Dmitry Kulikov as well, a Mike Riley who's going to be trying to prove himself as well after being bought out, and a guy who's who made the team, who is getting used to the North American ice, who really shined throughout the preseason in Uvis Balinskis as well. So I think I think you don't really know what your mix is going to be until you won't get a feel of it until maybe 10 games in, really, for this squad. So I think you got to make sure that his confidence is at a high level, especially after taking such a big break from hockey as well. So I think that's going to be a great situation. But also you can play the little bit of cap gymnastics, because you have the LTIR space from Aaron Ekblad, but you don't have to necessarily waive anyone. You can recall Spencer Knight for one game, send Justin Sordiff back down or something like that, and then send Spencer Knight right back to Charlotte, and then Sordiff back. Sordiff wouldn't even need to travel to Charlotte in order to play a game, and you could just do it. I mean, Buffalo did it with their goaltenders last year, so we could possibly see the same thing with the Florida Panthers. So I think it's going to be maybe around the late November, early December range that we could possibly see Spencer Knight, and then it probably won't be a long stay for that until there is break glass in case of an emergency situation for the Florida Panthers. So that's the luxury of that LTIR space for Aaron Ekblad. It's more than just bringing in Justin Sordiff, but it's also the switching of if you need to bring Spencer Knight for one game and then without sending him back down or putting someone else through waivers who's not waivers exempt. So that's my perspective on it. That's going to do it for part one of this special Florida Panthers season preview show between me, Jacob Winans, and Nick Fairbanks. Make sure to come back at noon Eastern for part two of this conversation, where we're going to discuss more about the state of the Florida Panthers and their upcoming season. So in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.